Okay, are you ready for the silly theme song?
I'm ready.
It's Nosh and Schmooze, where we talk about cool stuff concerning the Jews and everybody else. Welcome, everybody, to Nosh and Schmooze, to our very special edition. I'm here today with Mike Greenhaus, editor-in-chief of Relix Magazine, and we're going to be talking about Jews in music. And as always, if you have questions for Mike, you can put them in the comments on Facebook, and I will field them to him. But first, let me tell you a little bit about my guest. Mike Greenhaus is the editor-in-chief, as I said, of Relix, the longest standing print magazine dedicated to improvisational and independent music. He also co-hosts the bi-monthly Friday Night Jam speaking series, which explores the intersection of music and spirituality. And he is the co-founder of Shalom Y'all Jams, a nonprofit that organizes holiday services at non-traditional locations, which is something that is really exciting to me, something that my husband and I have done down in South Florida. So my first question for you, Mike, first off, thank you so much for being here. We're so happy to have you. And so I'm curious, how did you first come onto the music scene, and were your roots in the tribe an influencing factor in your musical origin story?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think, looking back on my life, even though I wasn't aware of it at the time, I definitely, some of the first experiences that I had uh, hearing music and seeing the power of music and also the spiritual elements of music were, through Jewish religious services that I went to growing up. That was always a really important part of my family life. And, whether it was going to a Shabbat service or high holidays or singing around the Passover Seder, music was always extremely important to me. My parents were both grew up in Queens. They actually have been together since high school and were big classic rock people. So I was luckily exposed early on to all the staples, whether it was Dylan or Simon and Garfunkel or the Grateful Dead, the Byrds, Neil Young. All the greats. My parents would just play around the house and whatnot. And then I was always interested in music as a fan. I also was always very interested in journalism. I worked for my high school newspaper and my college newspaper. And in college, especially, I was lucky enough to be in close proximity to a few different major Northeast cities. This was in the early 2000s and in the late 90s when the jam band scene was, really coming into its own in at least a modern way. So I was lucky to see, bands like the Disco Biscuits and Mo and String Cheese and Strange Folk kind of in their infancy as they were coming through the ranks, and was always really interested in kind of not only the music but the story behind it. So I started my senior year of college doing some writing for jambands.com, which is one of Relix's websites. And after I graduated from college in 2003, me and the two friends did a road trip across the country that just so happened to coincide with Phish's summer tour that year. And actually, in my as the story goes, I was in the parking lot of Deer Creek seeing Phish that summer. And this is before smartphones and whatnot. So I asked my friends to drive me to the Kinko so I could send a resume to Relix, which I was applying for an internship, and I got it, and I started that fall as an intern, and have been there ever since. Slowly working my way up the ranks. And in 2009, Relix's publisher at that time, who owned a few different magazines, he owned Global Rhythm Magazine, Metal Edge Magazine, and Metal Maniacs Magazine, decided he no longer could publish Relix. So myself and a few other staff members kind of pooled our resources and our skill sets, and were able to take over Relix. This was 2009, and we brought in Pete Shapiro, who had been a long time investor and friend of Relix. We had done the Jammy Awards with him. He, of course, had owned Wetlands, which was for me, the place where I saw a lot of these bands for the first time, and also where I really got to have a close relationship with Relix. I picked it up in the past before, but they would give them out by the door when you left. So I'm taking the train back to Westchester, where I grew up. I would always, take a Relix and flip through it. So at that point, Pete was about to open up the first Brooklyn Bowl location, and it made sense for him to kind of combine resources and also, was always just such a fan and supporter and important part of Relix's mission that it just made sense to all work together. And he came in as our publisher, and we've kind of been trucking along ever since. So it's definitely been a unique experience to not only be with Relix as the media landscape has changed and as the jam band scene has changed, but also, from most of my adult life, I was 21 when I first started, and I'm on the edge of 40 now.
Well, it seems like a dream job to me. Very exciting.
Well, it's funny, just like with anything, right? Like, when you're telling the story, it feels great, but it's this, when we're on a deadline and I'm late at night and my young son's screaming in the other room, it's hair pulling just like anything else. But I always love Relix, and being able to help keep it going has been one of the real blessings of my life. And I do think that what we're doing, especially in this day and age when everyone is disconnected from each other because of the pandemic, and geographically as people have spread out, it is nice that people could still check in on the web and our newswire on relix.com and jambands.com and feel connected that way. And one really interesting thing is that really early on in the pandemic, I was getting more feedback, both positive and negative, about the magazine that I had gotten in a really long time. And I realized it's because for the first time in a long while, people were stuck at home. So even if they were been getting the magazine for years, they had the chance to flip through it, and they were reading it, and they were sending us comments. And I think people really liked that connectivity. It came in the mail. It was something they could bring in and feel like there's a world outside their door.
Absolutely. And you're telling important stories of these artists that help connect us to them and their stories. And on that, I'm just curious, like, once in a rare while, an artist comes around and forces change to the musical landscape of our lives as a nation, even globally. Which Jewish artists in our musical history have pushed this envelope for you personally?
I think that it's been a thread through all the music. Of course, if you go back to, as I mentioned before, some of the classic rock acts that really inspired my parents and therefore inspired me. You look at Dylan, who obviously his Judaism for much of his career it really was a guiding force. Of course, Simon and Garfunkel. You could look at the Grateful Dead. Mickey Hart is Jewish, and obviously played a key role in shaping that band and also bringing in different world elements. Shifting a little bit, down the line to the bands that I grew up with and discovered myself. Of course, Half the Fish is Jewish, and there's a real, I feel like there's a real Jewish voice to that band, even though Trey and Paige are not Jewish, and also even though they don't, with very few exceptions, play traditional Jewish music. I think some of the younger bands who are now, I say younger, but are now, of course, well-established bands like the Disco Biscuits. Most of the members are Jewish. Guster, who's another band I grew up with, all the founding members are Jewish. So I really think it has been a thread throughout my own musical discovery. Perhaps there's elements of all those musicians' own personal journeys that ties to their Jewish heritage that therefore influences their music and makes it subconsciously or consciously appeal to me. But I think it's always been there in the music I like. And I could even look at some of the more indie rock leaning bands that I've been into in the last few years, like MGMT or Real Estate. They all have at least a few Jewish members that have kind of maybe shaped those individual musicians' trajectories.
So it's an interesting thing, right? This is actually a question from my husband that relates, but why do you think there's such a high preponderance of Jews in the scene? Like, what gravitates us specifically making and experiencing music? And you noted Fish and the Biscuits. We're all over the spectrum there. Why is that?
I think there's I think it's a multi-part answer. I think on a practical level, I do think that the Jewish summer camp experience was a real seed in that. I went to a camp that wasn't exclusively um, Jews, but large population was, and I definitely discovered a lot of the bands that we just mentioned through my camp experience. And I know a lot of other people have had a parallel experience where they got their first tapes from older camp counselors, or learned Grateful Dead or Fish, or even some of the younger band songs at camp. So I think that that definitely did spread through the ranks and continues to influence people's musical paths. And um, a lot of those formative experiences when you first are discovering music or are at camp, and they stick with you. So I think that's been a major reason. I think if you look on a little bit more of a spiritual level, of course, in Judaism, there's a emphasis on seeking and thinking and exploring and questioning, which definitely lends itself to the improvisational musical experience, which is very much tied into the Grateful Dead's ethos and the jam band ethos and Fish's ethos. I think that much like with the summer camp experience, a lot of the bands that we could traditionally consider modern jam bands really cut their teeth playing in the Northeast, especially on the college and prep school circuit in the 90s and early 2000s. In those areas, especially at that time, I think that there was a high density of Jewish people and of people who maybe did go through the camp experience, who therefore, similar to how people traded tapes and camp, they would, or traded songs around the campfire, they would go to camp, or sorry, go to college and be like, this is the band that plays around the Mid-Atlantic region, or this is the band that plays around the Northeast or the New England area. And that's how music spread. And those bands were coming to college campuses and sometimes even high school campuses and performing. And I think that helped spread. And I think that I think that going back to your first question, I think that music has always had a really important part in Jewish services and Jewish spiritual life that gives people the tools to discover and to make music into their world. And in Judaism, in many ways, is also a religion where you could have a spiritual experience and you could have a community experience outside of a traditional synagogue, which I think has allowed people to believe that they can have a spiritual experience at a concert, at a festival, with friends while camping in the woods. Which, if you take it way back, if you're looking at the original counterculture movement in the '60s, there was obviously a huge Jewish voice to that and a Jewish presence to that, and I think that has a lot to do with the fact that coming out of the World War II and the baby boomer generation, I think there was a lot of Jewish people who were looking for their identity as Jews in America, and that kind of coincided with a time when youth and when left-leaning people were just questioning traditional values and culture in general. So I think that's why you see a lot of the synthesis of those two.
Yeah, you were taking me back to Camp Ramah, and like I have a visceral memory of like being at camp the day that Jerry died, and just like the whole camp was mourning,
Absolutely.
And yeah, it's interesting. So I had a conversation with Rabbi Alan Tufts this morning. He's the rabbi at Temple Bethel, and he said that there was a study on the way that people kind of psychologically, how they communicate with the world, and like different ethnic groups might have a certain disposition towards certain ways of absorbing that energy. In like Roman culture, there's a lot of visual artists, right? And not to generalize too much, but in Judaism, there is that auditory response.
Yeah.
And he referenced that even in the Shema, "Hear, O Israel," right? That's how we translate it, as opposed to "See, O Israel," or it is "here." And so I think it's interesting, the connection there. So Mike, You spoke a bit about the spirituality and how it can be, not just in a sanctuary setting. I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about the inspiration that sparked Friday Night Jam.
Yeah, so this is actually, it's interesting. I was just talking to someone yesterday. This will be kind of the 10th year of this, which is amazing to think that it's been going on that long. It seems like just yesterday when it all started. But 9.5 years ago, my girlfriend at the time, now my wife, were looking to what we were going to do for the high holidays. She had come with me to and my family to our traditional Jewish high holidays experience in Westchester, which I loved growing up and still very much love and enjoy. But we were looking for something that felt more ours and felt very much connected to our lives. Our lives is at that point, late 20, early 30 somethings in New York. So we were looking around, and I noticed that the 92nd Street Y they used to have a Tribeca location. They had services which were led by Rabbi Dan Ain. And what really caught my eye was that the cantorial soloist was Jeremiah Lockwood, who I knew through both his band, the Sway Machinery, as well as his work with members of Antibalas and Arcade Fire and Yeah Yeah Yeahs and all these bands who felt very of the moment, and who I would go see, as a young music fan in New York. So we went to go check it out and just loved it. We loved the music. We loved the rabbi's presence. We loved their interpretation of the traditional prayers. And Jeremiah had a really, really interesting story in that, as I mentioned, he obviously had, he's an amazing blues guitarist, and his original music is in a lot of ways very modern sounding, and the players he has are some of the elite New York downtown players. Yet at the same time, his grandfather was one of the great European cantorial arrangers, and a lot of the hymns and prayers that I grew up singing, his grandfather actually had arranged, decades ago.
Wow.
And the mixture of this extreme reverent traditionalism and something that felt so modern, a blues guitarist, and in this setting he was just playing with an organist, who I actually knew from his work with Sean Lennon, and just his voice, which you could have been in Europe in 1920s, and it just felt so perfect and so real and authentic, and it moved us, and it made us feel that this was our place. So for a year or two, we would encourage our friends to come with us for 92nd Street Y. And then when Rabbi Ain decided that he was going to kind of go out on his own, he had been talking to people about where he could host high holiday services. He had built up a strong following, and one of the places that came up was Brooklyn Bowl, which is the venue owned by our Relix publisher, Pete Shapiro, or one of the venues that he owns. So I stepped in, and we did high holidays that year. It was just 2015, and it was amazing. And Jeremiah, and at that point he had put together a great band for high holiday services. They led the services there, and we used some of Relix's channels, as well as some of my own personal channels, to promote it, and the services did really well. And Dan and I started hosting the Friday Night Jam on Friday. It was every other month on Fridays at LPR, which is a downtown New York venue. And we would talk to different musicians about their spiritual path on a Friday night, and have what we hope was a meaningful Shabbat experience. And we tried to talk to people of different genres, different age groups, different religious backgrounds. We talked to Craig Finn of the Hold Steady, who is Catholic. We talked to the artist Sing Kane, who grew up in the Muslim faith. We've talked to people who are more practicing Jews, like Max Yahu and Jeremiah. We've talked to people who grew up Jewish, but maybe at least outwardly don't present it in their music as much. But as we've found with many of these conversations, one's spiritual and religious background is very much ingrained in their art. We coupled that with the fact that we would do a Shabbat experience. We would do blessings over, of the wine, and over we would have challah. We would light candles and have some meditation. So it was a really beautiful experience. And I really do feel that it was meaningful for both the musicians as well as our friends who came. And we found that it was both people who were looking to have a traditional Shabbat experience on Fridays, as well as people who either didn't grow up with that or felt disconnected from it to come and try it out. And we all appreciate the values of kind of putting down our phones and having a moment of reflection at that time. And then in 2018, Dan moved to California to take over a synagogue, and Rabbi Daniel Brenner, who's based here in Montclair, New Jersey, stepped in, and he's been leading our high holiday services for the last few years, as well as our Friday Night Jam series. And we've done some other, unique things around around Purim each year. We've done like a kids event at Brooklyn Bowl, which is based on the music of Fish, where we'll kind of reset that story to Fish's music with the help of a great band called Uncle Ebenezer, where they, take little bits of the story, and Rabbi Brenner will, weave that into his, his storytelling element with groggers and whatnot. It's really fun. And we've done some other great Passover events and other kind of community events throughout the years. And it's been really special. This year, for 2020, we, just like everyone else, had to kind of pivot and figure out what we were going to do. So we did it as a free live stream from Brooklyn Bowl. Sorry, High Holidays, this is, on fans.com, which is Pete Shapiro's website. And we did it without really any audience in the room. And we did the full service. It was basically just the musicians and Rabbi Brenner and a few other people who are taking part in the service. And it was really special. And we kind of tried to look for the silver lining, and one of that is that we could have musicians who are not able to come to the New York area participate. Some sent in videos or did live videos remotely, and it was really nice. So this year, hopefully, we could be back at least partially in person, but it'll be our 10th year, which is exciting.
Do you think that there's like a little kernel of truth from these conversations at the Friday Night Jams that has like stuck with you from one of these moments with the artists?
Kernels of truth, meaning like an overarching theme on the whole experience, or what do you?
I'm thinking of, was there a moment or something that somebody said to you that really stuck with you about this intersection of spirituality and music?
Yeah, I think that the thread tying them all together, all these different artists of different backgrounds and age groups, genders, religions, whatnot, is that, music is inherently spiritual. And whether it is, whether the musician at this point in their life seeks or finds that spiritual inspiration from a traditional service, or going to Burning Man, or doing a really intense health regimen, that ties to their music. And I think that one's background, colors the music or the art in general that they make. So if you grew up, attending services and embracing your Jewish life, that I think will come through in your music, even if it's zigzagged since then, how involved you are. And there's definitely been times when certain musicians have started the conversation with being like, I'm not a religious person, or I'm not a spiritual person, but by the time we were done talking 45 minutes later, it was clear that wasn't entirely correct. That they do find that their spirituality is so deeply in them that it still comes through. And I feel like we've always been able to have musicians play some songs at the end of our conversation, or sometimes interweaved, but usually at the end. And it just, listening to their music after hearing them talk about their religious upbringing, their spiritual background, I feel like just adds a really important weight to the music they perform at the end. And it's always a really powerful experience. And it's been really nice. And I hope that the musicians we've been lucky enough to have felt that way too.
I'm sure that they have. And I'm curious, with that being said, and where we are right now, which Jewish artists in the music industry are you most excited about in this moment?
I'll say this. So when we had to pivot and during the high holidays and go completely to a remote, we did a lot. We did the services live. That was the one thing that I was adamant about. I know a lot of synagogues did it. Did either pre-recorded it or did partially live and partially pre-recorded. But I think that one of the factors that really, I think, ties the community that we've been lucky enough to be part of together is the love of the live experience. And I think that there's a real, I think it adds a weight when something is live. You know what I mean? You could have a MOOC and mess up, or things might not be completely polished and perfect, but it feels really real and really authentic. And I think that that's what ties so many of the musicians that Relix covers together. I hope that's what ties so many of the artists we've spoken to in the Friday Night Jams together. And I really was adamant that we had to do it live. So a few musicians did pre-record their parts. The services that Rabbi Brenner led together were live, and we really got to reach out to a bunch of different Jewish musicians to see if they want to participate, and we were honored that a lot did across again different musical backgrounds and different age groups. So that being said, I think the musician who we got to participate, who I was most excited to get, was we got Jeff Tweedy from Wilco to participate. He actually converted to Judaism. His wife was raised Jewish, and both of his sons, became bar mitzvah, and he converted to Judaism. So having him play a song with his sons was beautiful. I was also, really happy that Dan Leibowitz of the band ALO, the Animal Liberation Orchestra, based out of the Bay Area, performed a few amazing songs for us, including Avinu Malkeinu, which was really special, and I feel like he really channeled his own religious upbringing, along with the fact that he knew he was playing for people who are used to going to Brooklyn Bowl. I mentioned before one of my favorite younger indie rock bands, Real Estate. My friend Alex Bleeker, who's one of the co-founders of the band, did some amazing. There's actually kind of a little bit of a left field choice, but I feel really tied into it. There's a performer who performed under the name Purple Mountains, and he was Jewish, and a lot of his music was influenced by Old Testament biblical verses, although it was kind of indie rock. So he interpreted that music, which was really special, and really tied into the entire I guess goal of the services, which was to combine this very modern and very traditional music. So we had prayer passages set in a really unique modern sense, but really reverence and really tied into the meaning and the traditional placement of them in the service. And
I didn't catch, you said it was something mountains?
Purple Mountains. Yeah.
Purple Mountains. Okay.
Yeah, and another person who did that was who's a Jewish performer who I love is Josh Kaufman. He used to play in a band called Yellowbirds, and more recently he's in the Bonnie Light Horsemen, which they were just nominated for a Grammy, and has produced a lot of different musicians over the years, and actually gets a couple credits on the new Taylor Swift album, which was produced by two other great Jewish musicians, Aaron Dessner of The National and Jack Antonoff of formerly Fun and now Bleachers.
Awesome. Wow, that's a lot to digest, and I'm gonna look up all their bands and listen to them. I do have some comments here from Facebook land. So Greg says, I had a spiritual rebirth during Strange Folk at gatherings of the Vibes in 2002, and he saw the Purim thing, and it was so entertaining. And also wondering, has Relix kept their office open during the pandemic?
Just before I answer that question, so I should say too, we speaking of Strange Folk, we were also lucky enough to have Reed Genauer, who is the singer of Strange Folk and one of the co-founders of the band, do a few pieces during the high holidays, which he actually pre-recorded with his father, and his dad did the traditional Hebrew cantorial chanting, and Reed played some music behind it, and it was really beautiful. So I should also have mentioned Reed there, who is someone who, again, I had so many special moments seeing him play music over the years, and it just felt perfect to have him not only being part of the service, but doing it with his dad, and continuing that tradition. And I was listening with my parents, actually, and it was funny because the way Reed's father was chanting the prayers felt like, in a lot of ways, one of the more orthodox parts of the, for lack of a better term, of the experience. It was extremely traditional, yet he was doing it in concert with Reed, who of course is tied to this other world. Relix's offices closed, temporarily last March when New York really shut down. We did have a few people. I'll shout out my friend and coworker Harrison, who went in throughout the time to do things like send out shipping orders and get mail and all that. Late summer, we reconfigured the space to make it look a little bit more, or not look, but to be a little bit more COVID compliant, with whether it's temperature checks and spaced out desks and all that. And people have, or a certain number of people have the ability to go in each week if they want to get work done, to have a place they could, leave the distractions of home behind. And people have been going in since then very regularly. We are not requiring everyone to come in quite yet. I would imagine in the fall, around Labor Day, we're going to most likely reopen in a more traditional capacity. Our office was always very vibrant, and that's one of the things that made it so special. There were bands coming in for video performances. There were managers and publicists popping by for meetings. We share space with Headcount, the great voter registration focused nonprofit, and a bunch of Pete's other properties like Brooklyn Bowl have office space there. So there was always a lot of energy, which at least at this point is not entirely conducive to being able to work safely. So though we're open, we're not completely open, but I'm hoping in the fall we could go back to normal a little bit.
Yeah, don't we all? And I did have another question from Facebook. We love Reed, and we're wondering where we could see this video of him and his father. Is that available somewhere?
I believe if you go to, I think it's the EurosFans.live, which is where we've streamed it from. I believe it should still be up there, probably towards the bottom now, since it was in September. And I believe he was, that was the end of the Rosh Hashanah morning service. It was the last 5 or 6 minutes. You can look in there, but I could also dig it up to you guys and send it to you, and you could
awesome.
Share it with everyone. But yeah, that was really special to see and be part of.
Last time my husband and I saw him was when we were working at a Jewish summer camp in upstate New York, which was a while ago. So, and so we touched a little bit about like coming back to live music. Concerts are back in some places in some ways. Many outdoor venues have already produced these socially distanced shows utilizing pods. What does the future of live music look like in a post-pandemic world?
I think that when things can safely reopen, hopefully they will. And I think things are going to open sooner than we might think. Assuming that it's so hard to tell, if you asked me 6 weeks ago, would some of these events that have been announced for September, say like big outdoor festivals and gatherings happen, I might have been skeptical of it. But I think that luckily the vaccine rollout seems to be going a lot quicker than expected. So I think that I know that there was some concerning news about the Johnson & Johnson vaccine this morning. So, I'm not sure how that will play into everything, but assuming that gets safely cleared up relatively soon, I think most people, it sounds like, who want to be vaccinated will be vaccinated by the middle of the summer. So I do feel that once that happens, by after Labor Day, especially with outdoor events, if everyone who wants to be and can be is vaccinated, by midsummer, I see no reason why the fall, these events won't happen. And I think that there are definitely going to be some people who just are hesitant or have had a little, need a little minute to recalibrate before they feel comfortable jumping back into a traditional concert setting. But at the same time, I think there's also going to be people who just, are so hungry for live music and for a collective experience, they're going to jump right into it. So I do think we're going to see traditional outside shows in the fall, and hopefully if things progress, indoor shows not long after that.
Do you think there will be something where like venues will require you to show them like a vaccination card to be in certain sections or something like that? I know like with the Miami Heat right now, for instance, like they have sections in the arena for people that can be closer together that have already been vaccinated, things like that.
I think that's gonna, I think that some venues, yes, will require vaccinations. I think that is going to sidestep itself into a little bit of a political discourse and a regional discourse. I don't have the knowledge base to know how that's all going to play out. But my thought is that there are going to be some places that are going to require it, and I think that might actually encourage some people to get vaccinated who maybe were on the fence or who just didn't think it was a priority, because we all want to go see live music. And then there's some places that might not, or might make a point not to, because of they're on the other side and want to make sure that or are trying to prove a point, for lack of a better term. But I think some places will, some places won't. I think that hopefully enough people will get vaccinated that it will just help really combat this awful disease, and that we will be in a safer place, in the next 6 months, especially. But I think for a lot of the traditional venues, they will require that, or a rapid test before, whether it's some places it's 72 hours, some places it's 24 hours. You have to show that, and I think that would make me feel a lot safer too, knowing that people are vaccinated around me. So I know there's some concerns about privacy and whatnot. So without going into that rabbit hole in my own mind, yes, I'd feel safer knowing everyone's vaccinated around me, but at the same time, I know some places probably aren't gonna do that quite yet as well.
Right. There's, by the way, another thing the Heat are doing, they're utilizing COVID sniffing dogs.
Oh, that's awesome.
So when you go into the venue, if they sniff you and the dogs think you have COVID, they do a rapid test.
Yeah.
So they're training them at FIU. It's a whole thing.
Yeah.
I
think concerts are going to come back, and for a long time, I always said it's not going to be like turning on a light switch. I think it's going to be a trickle, and then I actually think more and more that it almost will be like turning on a light switch. It's like as soon as culturally and nationally we feel ready for concerts to return, I think they will. And I think that at first I thought it was going to be a lot of big tour or tours through big places with at 25% capacity at 30. And I think no, I think it's going to be the people that are going to do the real drive-in social distance pod thing, or they're going to do a traditional show when it's safe. Like this trickle in is not going to be not going to happen the way at least I thought it was going to happen originally. And I think that generally it could be a little before, it could be a little bit after, but Labor Day seems to be the time when things after Labor Day seem a lot more likely to happen than things right before. But again, if things really speed up, then there's no reason why it can't be earlier in the summer.
So if you could see one concert right now, of like a real concert where people are together and just bouncing off that energy, who would it be?
I mean, I'd see Fish right now. I'd be excited. I definitely have over the last, I'm lucky, both because of my profession and living in New York, and because I spend a lot of time actively trying to seek it out. I'm lucky to see a ton of live music, or traditionally have seen a ton of live music. This has been a little bit of a drought the last year. I've seen a couple things, both, a couple drive-in, pod, incidental dining theater type shows, as well as some of these tapings that the Relix has been doing. We've been hosting an awesome series on Twitch each week, where we'll have musicians play at an empty venue in the city. So I've been lucky enough to check some of that out and do a jazz club style voiceover intro, which has been fun. But so I have seen some music, but I have not seen anything that what I would consider like a full-on concert experience. And I'm really looking forward to that. The last big show I saw was the Allman Brothers celebration. They called themselves the Brothers. It was at MSG right before, like a day before everything really shut down. Obviously, we didn't know what the state of the world was going to be a few days later. Otherwise, probably would not have attended that. But at the time, it felt safe, and I'm lucky that I didn't get sick. So, the next big show will be amazing. But I think that it's really made me just appreciate, not that I never didn't appreciate live music, but it made me appreciate even more so. Like, if I've seen a jazz combo play in Washington Square Park near me, it's just felt so special. And I've maybe stopped and watched and taken that in a little bit more than maybe I would have in the past. And any music I've seen has been really special.
Yes, me too. And I'm also very excited, as I think all of our viewers are, to get back to live music. And thank you so much for joining us today, Mike.
Thank you for having me. This is really fun.
Yeah. I did share the links for Relix and jam bands, and Because Jewish, so y'all can look those up and go find it. And
shameless plug, we have this Friday, we're doing a virtual Friday night jam with John Medeski from Medeski Martin and Wood, which will be hosted on both Relix's Facebook page as well as the Because Jewish Facebook page. And me and Rabbi Brenner will be having a conversation with him about spirituality, actually along with a shaman that he is working with and has an awesome new album out with. So that'll quote unquote debut at 7 o'clock on Friday, and will also be available to look at after the fact. So I encourage people to check that out. He also touches a little bit on his work with the great jazz performer who is a lot of his work is in the realm of what he calls, radical Jewish music, where he takes a lot of traditional hymns and gives them a really cool downtown New York remix. So John talks a little bit about that as well. So it definitely ties directly into kind of the Great Friday Night Jam vibe that we go for.
Awesome. Thank you for that. I can't wait to check it out. All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. Thank you, Mike. And everybody have a beautiful week. Next week, we will be talking about with David Oliver about refugees and what the IRC is doing to help refugees in this country and around the world.